The meeting room on Station Alpha 7 felt cold despite the warm lighting. Ambassador Lisa Carter smoothed her dark blue diplomatic uniform and checked her notes one final time. Across the polished metal table, 3 Zephyrian delegates sat, with their arms crossed, their blue skin almost glowing under the artificial lights. Their faces showed no emotion, but Lisa had learned to read their body language over the past 2 years. They were angry again. Behind Lisa, Colonel Jake Morrison stood perfectly still in his military dress uniform. His presence was meant to remind everyone that humanity had teeth, even if they chose not to show them. The other species in the Galactic Council often forgot that humans had once been warriors. Lisa preferred it that way. The lead Zephorian delegate, a tall female named Zaraketh, placed her hands flat on the table. Her voice carried the usual tone of barely controlled irritation. Ambassador Carter, your people continue to ignore our legitimate claims to the Outer Rim territories. We have been patient, but patience has limits. Lisa nodded slowly, keeping her face calm. The territories in question were legally settled by human colonists over 30 years ago. Our documentation is complete and has been filed with the Council. We remain open to discussion about shared mining rights in the asteroid fields nearby. Another Zephyrian, this one male with scars across his neck, leaned forward. Shared rights? Those minerals belong to the Zephyrian Empire by right of discovery. Your people are thieves, hiding behind Council law. Colonel Morrison's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. Lisa had worked with Jake for 5 years. She could read the warning signs. His hands remained clasped behind his back, but his shoulders had tensed. She gave him a quick glance and saw him relax. I understand your frustration, Lisa said, her voice remaining steady. Perhaps we could arrange a joint mining operation. Your people have excellent extraction technology, and our colonists have developed efficient processing methods. Working together could benefit both our peoples. The third Zephyrian, younger than the others, made a sound that might have been laughter. You offer us partnership in what is already ours. How generous of the peaceful humans. Lisa pulled up, a holographic display showing shipping records. In the past 6 months, Zephyrian vessels have intercepted 17 human cargo ships in neutral space. The crews were detained for days without cause. Several were injured during these stops. This violates 3 separate Council trade agreements? Zaraketh waved her hand dismissively. Random security checks? Pirates often disguise themselves as legitimate traders. We are protecting Council interests. The cargo manifests were legal and properly documented, Lisa replied. Delays cost our shipping companies millions of credits. More importantly, treating peaceful traders as criminals damages the trust we have worked to build. The scared Zephyrian stood up abruptly. Trust? Your people arrived in Council space 15 years ago with your ships and your weapons and your strange customs. You smile and speak of peace while building colonies on every world you can reach. We see what you really are. Jake Morrison finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. And what do you think we really are? The room fell silent. Lisa felt her heart. Rate increased slightly. Jake rarely spoke during these meetings, and when he did, it usually meant trouble was coming. Zaraketh looked at the colonel with obvious disdain. Predators pretending to be prey. Your species conquered your entire home system before you learned to travel between stars. You fought wars that killed millions of your own kind. Oh, yeah. Now you come to us speaking of peace and cooperation, but we know what lies beneath your diplomatic words. Lisa kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt a familiar, cold anger. The Zephyrians had been pushing boundaries for months. First the cargo ship harassment, then the disputed mining claims, and now open insults during formal negotiations. Each incident was carefully calculated to test human resolve. Our history is not secret, Lisa said. Yes, humanity fought wars in our past. We learned from those mistakes. That is why we choose diplomacy now. That is why we joined the Council and agreed to its laws. The young Zephyrian laughed again. Convenient timing. Your people stopped fighting just when you met species that could fight back. Colonel Morrison took a single step forward. It was a small movement, but every alien in the room noticed. His voice remained calm, but something had changed in his tone. We stopped fighting because we chose to stop fighting. There is a difference. Lisa placed a hand on her tablet, calling up another file. 3 weeks ago, a Zephyrian patrol ship fired on the research station orbiting Kepler 44b. The station. It was clearly marked as a scientific facility with no military purpose. 17 researchers were injured, and Dr. Emma Watson died from her wounds. An accident, Zaraketh said quickly. Our commander mistook the station for a military outpost. Compensation has been offered. Dr. Watson was a botanist studying crop diseases, Lisa continued. Her research could have helped feed millions of people across Council space. Her death was not just a loss for humanity, but for everyone who might have benefited from her work. Room stayed quiet for a long moment. Lisa watched the Zephyrians exchange glances. She had learned to read their silent communications during months of negotiations. They were deciding how far to push. Finally, Zaraketh spoke again. The Zephyrian Empire regrets the loss of life. However, accidents happen during military operations. Your people choose to place civilian facilities in disputed territory. Perhaps the responsibility is not entirely ours. Lisa felt her carefully maintained control slip slightly. Emma Watson had been her friend since their academy days. They had served together on 3 different diplomatic missions before Emma chose scientific research over politics. She had been brilliant, kind, and completely devoted to helping others. Calling her death an acceptable accident crossed a line. Colonel Morrison must have sensed the change in Lisa's mood. He moved closer to the table, his presence suddenly feeling more threatening than protective. Ambassador Carter has shown remarkable patience with your people's behavior. She has overlooked insults, ignored provocations, and continued to offer peaceful solutions to every problem. I recommend you not mistake her dedication to diplomacy for weakness. The scared Zephyrian stood up again, his voice rising. Is that a threat, human? Are you finally showing your true nature? Jake's smile was cold and entirely without humor. If I were threatening you, there would be no doubt about it. I am simply offering friendly advice. Ambassador Carter represents the peaceful side of humanity. There are other sides. Lisa stood as well, her diplomatic training taking over despite her anger. Gentlemen, please. We're here to solve problems, not create new ones. Colonel Morrison, perhaps you could wait outside while we continue our discussion. Jake nodded once and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned back to the Zephyrians. A word of advice from one warrior to another. When someone offers you peace, especially someone who knows how to make war, you should consider accepting it. After he left, the room felt different. Lisa sat back down and tried to restart the negotiations, but the Zephyrians seemed distracted. They kept glancing at the door where Jake had disappeared. The meeting ended 2 hours later with no real progress. The Zephyrians made vague promises to investigate the cargo ship incidents and discuss compensation for the research station attack. Lisa knew they had no intention of following through. As she gathered her files, Zaraketh approached her table. Your colonel is very protective of you. Lisa looked up. Jake Morrison is a good soldier and a loyal friend. Takes threats to Council peace seriously, and threats to you personally. Lisa met the Zephyrian's gaze steadily. Colonel Morrison has served humanity for 23 years. He has seen what happens when diplomacy fails. He prefers to prevent such failures. Zaraketh nodded slowly. Perhaps your people are not as soft as we believed. Lisa packed the last of her files and stood. We are exactly as soft as we choose to be. I hope your people remember that distinction.
Yes.
As she walked toward the door, Lisa wondered how much longer humanity's patience would last. In her private communications with Earth, she had begun to notice subtle changes in tone from the Colonial Council. Certain words appeared more frequently in official documents. Terms like self-defense and proportional response were becoming common in policy papers. The galaxy still saw humans as the newest members of the Council, eager to please and careful not to offend. They interpreted human restraint as submission and human diplomacy as fear. Lisa knew they were wrong, but she also knew that proving them wrong would change everything. She walked through the station corridors toward her quarters, thinking about Emma Watson and 17 injured researchers and hundreds of harassed cargo crews. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice was beginning to whisper that maybe peaceful solutions were not always the right solutions. Lisa. Carter had been trained to seek peace through diplomacy, but she was also human, and humans had not. Forgotten how to do other things when peace was not enough. The emergency alert reached Admiral Helen Brooks at 0347 hours, ship time. She had been reviewing supply reports in her private quarters aboard the UHS Liberty when her personal communication device started screaming. The sound was one she had not heard in over 12 years of service. It meant only one thing: human civilians were under attack. Helen rolled out of her bunk and grabbed her uniform, her mind already shifting into combat mode. Around her, the massive ship began to hum, with increased activity as crew members responded to the general alarm. She could hear running footsteps in the corridors and the distant sound of launch bay doors opening. The main display in her ready room showed the source of the alert. New Portland, a farming colony in the outer territories, was broadcasting a distress signal. The planet housed nearly 200,000 civilians, mostly families who had left Earth to start new lives, growing food for the expanding human settlements. Captain Ryan Davis appeared on her screen within minutes, his face grim. His ship, the UHS Defender, was 3 days closer to New Portland than Helen's fleet. Admiral, we are receiving multiple signals from the colony. Zephyrian ships entered the system 2 hours ago without warning. They began attacking civilian targets immediately. Helen felt her stomach drop. Casualties? Unknown, but early reports suggest thousands. They hit the primary school first, then the medical center, then the agricultural processing plants. This was not a military operation, Admiral. This was murder. Helen closed her eyes for a moment. She had 2 daughters back on Earth, both around the same age as many of the children who would have been in that school. How many Zephyrian ships? Long-range sensors show at least 40 vessels, including heavy cruisers. They have ground forces deployed in all major population centers. Admiral, they are not taking prisoners. Every transmission we intercept suggests they are killing civilians systematically. The communication channel expanded to include other ship commanders across the sector. Helen could see the same expression on every face: shocked anger mixed with disbelief. Humans had been part of the Galactic Council for 15 years. Wars between council members were supposed to be impossible. Commander Sandra White joined the conversation from her position near the Centauri system. Admiral Brooks, we have been monitoring Zephyrian military communications. They are calling this Operation Final Solution. They intend to eliminate the entire human population of New Portland. Helen felt something cold settle in her chest. The phrase final solution had terrible meaning in human history. For the Zephyrians to use those words suggested they understood exactly what they were doing. This was not a military mistake or an accident during a territory dispute. This was genocide. Status of rescue operations. Helen asked. Captain Davis shook his head. Admiral, any rescue ships will be destroyed before they reach the planet. The Zephyrians have established a complete blockade. They are not allowing anyone to leave. Another voice joined the conversation. Dr. Katie Williams, the chief medical officer of New Portland, was broadcasting from the planet's surface. Her transmission was breaking up due to interference, but her words were clear. This is Dr. Williams at New Portland Medical Center. We have hundreds of wounded civilians, including children. The Zephyrian forces are targeting medical facilities and schools. They are not following any rules of war. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need immediate evacuation for our wounded. Helen watched the medical officer's face on the screen. Dr. Williams was young, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her medical coat was covered in blood, and smoke was visible behind her. Despite the chaos around her, her voice remained calm and professional. We have been treating burn victims and trauma cases for the past 6 hours, Dr. Williams continued. The Zephyrian soldiers are moving through the civilian shelters systematically. They are not accepting surrender. They're executing anyone they find, including children and elderly civilians. The transmission cut to static for a moment, then returned. Dr. Williams was now looking directly into the camera, her expression desperate but determined. I need everyone listening to understand what is happening here. This is not a military action. This is extermination. The Zephyrians came not as conquerors, but as exterminators. We offered them peace, and they chose to murder our children. The transmission ended abruptly. Helen tried to re-establish contact, but there was no response. From the surface, long-range sensors showed massive energy signatures consistent with orbital bombardment. The Zephyrians were destroying the cities from space. Helen's communication device chimed with an incoming priority message from Earth. President Daniel Foster appeared on her screen, his face grave. Behind him, she could see other government officials gathering in what looked like an emergency session. Admiral Brooks, the president said without preamble, I am calling an emergency session of the Colonial Assembly. The attack on New Portland changes everything. How long until your fleet can reach the system? 6 days at maximum burn, Mr. President? But sir, by the time we arrive, there may be no survivors to rescue. President Foster nodded slowly. Admiral, I am authorizing you to use any means necessary to respond to this attack. The rules of engagement are hereby suspended. The Zephyrians have chosen to target our civilians. They will face the consequences. Of that choice, Helen felt a chill run down her spine. She had served in the human military for over 20 years, but she had never heard a president suspend the rules of engagement. Those rules existed to prevent wars from becoming slaughters. Without them, human military forces would be free to use weapons and tactics that had been banned since the formation of the Colonial Assembly. Mr. President, are you authorizing full military response? I am authorizing whatever response you deem appropriate to protect human lives and ensure this never happens again. The Zephyrians wanted to see what humans do when pushed too far. They are about to find out. The transmission ended, and Helen was alone with her thoughts. Around her, the ship continued its urgent preparations. She could hear the sound of weapons being armed and fighters being prepped for launch. The Liberty was a peaceful exploration vessel, or at least that was what other species believed. In reality, like most human ships, it carried enough firepower to level a planet. Helen activated her ship's internal communication system. Her voice echoed through every corridor and compartment as she addressed her crew. All hands, this is Admiral Brooks. By now you have heard about the attack on New Portland. Zephyrian forces have murdered thousands of human civilians, including children. They have targeted schools, hospitals, and civilian shelters. She paused, letting the words sink in. For 15 years, humanity has chosen the path of peace. Have absorbed insults, ignored provocations, and sought diplomatic solutions to every conflict. We believed that patience and understanding would prevent the wars that once consumed our home world. Helen's voice grew colder. We were wrong. Zephyrians have interpreted our restraint as weakness. They have mistaken our choice of peace for an inability to make war. Today, they have learned the cost of that mistake. The ship's corridors fell silent except for the hum of machinery. Every crew member was listening to their admiral's words, understanding that everything was about to change. The Colonial Assembly has authorized unlimited response to this attack. We are no longer bound by the restrictions we have placed on ourselves. We are no longer required to show mercy to those who show none to our children. Helen took a deep breath before continuing. I want every department head to review our full military capabilities. I want every weapon system checked and ready. I want our fighters armed with everything we have. Zephyrians wanted to see what humans do when our families are threatened. We are going to show them. The Admiral closed the channel and turned to her tactical displays. The screens showed the locations of every human ship within 50 light-years of New Portland. There were more than the Zephyrians realized. What? Much more. For 15 years, humanity had maintained the fiction that their ships were primarily civilian vessels with minimal military capabilities. The truth was that every human ship, from the smallest cargo hauler to the largest research vessel, was built to military specifications with concealed weapons and armor. Helen began issuing orders to her fleet commanders. Within hours, over 300 human ships were converging on New Portland. The Zephyrians had brought 40 ships to commit genocide. Humanity was bringing an army to deliver justice as her ships jumped to faster-than-light speed, Helen thought. About Dr. Katie Williams and the thousands of civilians who had died while calling for help. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. We offered them peace, and they chose to murder our children. The time for offering peace was over. It was time to show the galaxy what humans had been choosing not to do for the past 15 years. The Zephyrians had wanted to see humanity's true nature. They were about to get their wish, and Helen suspected they would regret it very quickly. The war that would reshape the galaxy had begun, and it had started with the murder of children. Captain Susan Torres stood on the bridge of the UHS Vengeance, watching the tactical display as her fleet dropped out of hyperspace. The New Portland system spread before them, and what she saw made her jaw clench. Zephyrian ships moved in perfect formation around the planet, their weapons still firing down at the surface. Even from space, she could see the glow of burning cities behind her. Commander Alex Hamilton monitored the communications array. His voice was tight with controlled anger. Captain, we are detecting at least 50 Zephyrian vessels in system. They have destroyers, cruisers, and what appears to be a dreadnought-class ship near the planet's north pole. Susan nodded, her eyes never leaving the display. The human fleet had arrived with over 200 ships. They had maintained the appearance of civilian vessels until this moment. Now, across the entire fleet, hidden weapons were powering up and concealed armor plating was sliding into position. Open a channel to all ships, Susan ordered. It is time to drop the pretense. The transformation that followed would have shocked any alien observer. Ships that had appeared to be simple cargo haulers suddenly revealed massive missile batteries. Research vessels deployed fighter squadrons that had been hidden in fake laboratory modules. Even the smallest courier ships showed their true nature as fast attack craft bristling with advanced weapons. Susan's own ship underwent the most dramatic change. The Vengeance had been disguised as a deep space exploration vessel for over 8 years. In reality, it was one of humanity's most advanced battleships, capable of destroying entire fleets. As its weapons came online, the ship's hull reconfigured itself, revealing the sleek predatory design that had been hidden beneath fake civilian panels. All ships report ready for combat, Commander Hamilton announced. Admiral Brooks is requesting permission to begin the attack. Susan opened a fleet-wide channel. Her voice carried clearly to every human ship in the system. Attention all vessels. The Zephyrians have chosen to murder our children. They have targeted schools, hospitals, and civilian shelters. They have shown no mercy to our people, and they will receive none from us. She paused, looking at the tactical display showing the enemy positions. For 15 years we have hidden our true capabilities from the galaxy. We have pretended to be merchants and explorers and scientists. Today, we show them what we really are. Today, we remind the universe why humans once conquered an entire star system before we learned to travel between worlds. The first salvo from the human fleet lit up space like 1,000 suns. Missiles streaked toward Zephyrian positions while energy weapons carved through the darkness. The aliens had been expecting to face civilian vessels with minimal defenses. Instead, they found themselves under attack by a military force that had been planning for this moment for years. The Zephyrian response was immediate, but confused. Their ships began maneuvering to face the human fleet. But their movements showed they did not understand what they were fighting. Zephyrian tactics were based on formal military doctrine, with predictable patterns and honorable engagements between equally matched forces. Human tactics were based on survival. Susan's ships moved in patterns that seemed random to alien observers, but followed mathematical principles developed during humanity's bloodiest wars. They used the planet's gravity well as a weapon, slingshotting around the world to gain impossible angles of attack. They deployed electronic warfare systems that had been disguised as civilian communication equipment. The battle was not a fair fight. It was an execution. Commander Hamilton coordinated the fleet's fighter squadrons as they poured from hidden launch bays. Captain, our pilots are reporting that Zephyrian fighters are attempting to engage in traditional combat formation. Squadrons are ignoring their formation requests and attacking from multiple vectors simultaneously. Susan watched as human fighters swarmed around the larger Zephyrian ships like angry wasps. The aliens expected aerial combat to follow certain rules, with structured engagements and predictable tactics. Human pilots had learned their trade in the brutal wars of Earth, where survival mattered more than honor. The Zephyrian Dreadnought, a massive ship that had been leading the bombardment of New Portland, suddenly found itself surrounded by a dozen human vessels. The aliens aboard probably expected a formal challenge or demands for surrender. Instead, the human ships opened fire simultaneously. Targeting the Dreadnought's weak points with surgical precision, the great ship died in minutes, its hull cracking open like an egg as human weapons found ammunition storage areas and reactor cores. The explosion lit up half the system and sent shockwaves through the remaining Zephyrian fleet. Captain Hamilton called out, "We are receiving surrender requests from multiple Zephyrian vessels." Susan's expression did not change. "Inform them that surrender will be considered after all hostile ships have been neutralized. Any vessel that continues to fire on planetary targets will be destroyed immediately." The human fleet continued its systematic destruction of Zephyrian forces. Ships that attempted to flee found themselves pursued by fast attack craft that had been disguised as maintenance vessels. Ships that tried to fight discovered that human weapons technology was decades ahead of anything the Galactic Council had. Seen within 3 hours, the space around New Portland was filled with debris from destroyed Zephyrian vessels. Of the 50 ships that had participated in the genocide, only 12 remained intact. These survivors had powered down their weapons and were broadcasting surrender. Signals on all frequencies. Susan opened a channel to the surviving Zephyrian commander. The alien's face appeared on her screen, his blue skin pale with shock. Him? She could see smoke and sparks from damaged systems. "I am Captain Susan Torres of the Human Colonial Fleet," she announced. "You have participated in the murder of civilians, including children. Your forces targeted schools, hospitals, and refugee centers. These are war crimes under Galactic Council law." The Zephyrian commander's voice shook as he replied, "Captain Torres, we surrender. Our ships are no longer combat capable. We request mercy under the Galactic Conventions." Susan's smile was cold and without warmth. The Galactic Conventions require that military forces distinguish between combatants and civilians. Your forces made no such distinction. You showed no mercy to our children. Why should we show mercy to you? The alien commander looked confused, but you are humans. Your species values peace and diplomacy. You have always sought non-violent solutions. We valued peace because we chose to value peace, Susan replied. That choice has now been revoked. You wanted to see what humans do when pushed beyond our limits? Congratulations, you succeeded. She turned to her tactical officer, Commander Hamilton. Deploy boarding parties to all surviving Zephyrian vessels. I want complete records of their operations, including orders and communications. Every officer involved in targeting civilians will be identified and held for trial. The human boarding parties that assaulted the surviving Zephyrian ships moved with an efficiency that terrified their prisoners. These were not the peaceful explorers and merchants that the aliens had grown accustomed to. These were soldiers, who had trained for war while pretending to be civilians. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Carson led the assault on the Zephyrian command ship. His team moved through the alien vessel with practiced precision, securing key areas and capturing important personnel. The Zephyrians they encountered seemed stunned by the transformation they had witnessed. One captured Zephyrian officer spoke to Carson as he was being escorted to a holding area. We thought humans were weak. You always spoke of peace and cooperation. You never showed your weapons or threatened anyone. Carson's response was matter-of-fact. We spoke of peace because we preferred peace. We did not show our weapons because we hoped never to use them. You have changed that calculation. The systematic destruction of the Zephyrian fleet was being broadcast across the galaxy through automated communication relays. Other species watched in shock as humanity revealed capabilities that had been hidden for 15 years. The humans, who had seemed so eager to please, so careful not to offend, had been apex predators all along. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Susan received reports from the surface of New Portland. The planet had been devastated, with major cities destroyed and hundreds of thousands of civilians dead. The images transmitted from the surface showed the true scope of the Zephyrian atrocity. General Patricia Reynolds, commanding the human ground forces that had landed to secure the planet, sent regular updates. Her troops were finding evidence of systematic execution of civilians, including children who had been hiding in supposedly safe areas. Captain Torres, General Reynolds reported, the Zephyrians were not just attacking random targets. They had lists of human families, schools, and medical facilities. This genocide was planned in advance and executed with deliberate precision. Susan felt her anger deepen. The attack on New Portland had not been a military operation that had gone wrong. It had been a calculated attempt to exterminate human civilians. The Zephyrians had planned to murder every man, woman, and child on the planet. She opened a channel to Admiral Brooks, who was coordinating the overall human response from her flagship. Admiral, we have secured the New Portland system. Zephyrian forces have been neutralized. Admiral Helen Brooks stood in the command center of the UHS Liberty, studying the holographic map that showed the entire Zephyrian Empire. Red markers indicated military installations, shipyards, and weapons factories. Blue markers showed civilian population centers. Yellow markers represented government facilities and command centers. In the past week, humanity had struck every red and yellow target with devastating precision. The war had lasted exactly 28 days so far, but everyone knew it would be over soon. The Zephyrian military, once considered among the most powerful in the galaxy, had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Their ships fled at the sight of human vessels. Their commanders surrendered rather than face human tactics. Commander Sandra White approached with the latest intelligence reports. Her face showed the exhaustion that came from coordinating a military campaign across dozens of star systems. Admiral, our forces have secured the Zephyrian shipyards at Kepler 186. Resistance was minimal. Most of the workers abandoned the facilities before we arrived. Helen nodded, marking another target as eliminated on her tactical display. Casualties on our side? None, Admiral. The Zephyrians are no longer attempting to fight. They are simply running. The systematic destruction of Zephyrian military capability had shocked even human commanders. They had expected to be a difficult war against a technologically advanced enemy, had become a methodical dismantling of an empire that had no effective response to human warfare. Captain Ryan Davis appeared on the communications screen from his position near the Zephyrian border. His ship had been leading the advance into enemy territory, encountering minimal resistance. Admiral Brooks, we have reached the outer defense grid of the Zephyrian home system. The defensive stations are powered down and broadcasting surrender signals. Helen felt no satisfaction at the news. The ease of their victory only emphasized how unprepared the galaxy had been for human military capabilities. For 15 years, humanity had carefully hidden their true strength, allowing other species to believe they were facing merchants and scientists rather than warriors. Status of the Zephyrian government? Helen asked. Captain Davis consulted his reports. Intelligence suggests the ruling council fled the homeworld 3 days ago. They are believed to be hiding in the outer colonies, but those systems are surrendering as fast as we can reach them. The speed of the Zephyrian collapse had surprised even human military planners. The aliens had built their empire on the assumption that warfare followed certain rules, with formal declarations, structured battles, and negotiated conclusions. They had no experience fighting an enemy that viewed war as a problem to be solved rather than a contest to be won. General Patricia Reynolds joined the conference from her headquarters on the occupied world of Zephyr Prime. Her ground forces had taken the planet with minimal fighting, encountering an enemy that seemed more confused than hostile. Admiral, we have completed our review of Zephyrian military doctrine. Our entire strategic philosophy was based on intimidation and formal combat. They never developed contingencies for asymmetric warfare. Helen studied the reports flowing in from across the former Zephyrian Empire. Human forces had used tactics that seemed obvious to military minds trained in Earth's violent history, but were completely alien to species that had never faced existential threats. Human ships appeared where they were not expected, struck targets that seemed impossible to reach, and disappeared before enemy forces could respond. They used psychological warfare, spreading fear and confusion through enemy ranks. They turned the Zephyrians' own communication networks against them, broadcasting images of destroyed fleets and fallen strongholds. Most importantly, humans had demonstrated a willingness to escalate beyond any level their enemies could match. When Zephyrian commanders expected limited objectives and negotiated settlements, they found themselves facing total war aimed at the complete destruction of their civilization's military capability. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Carson reported from the captured Zephyrian military academy on Rigel 7. His forces had taken the facility without firing a shot. As the instructors and cadets had evacuated before human forces arrived, "Admiral, we have recovered complete files on Zephyrian military training and doctrine. They were teaching combat techniques that would have been obsolete on Earth 2 centuries ago." The revelation explained much about the war's progression. Zephyrian military thinking was based on conflicts between civilized species that followed agreed-upon rules of engagement. They had never faced an enemy that treated war as a total effort requiring the complete destruction of the opponent's ability to continue fighting. Helen opened a channel to President Foster on Earth. The president appeared tired, but determined, surrounded by advisors and military officials. Behind him, she could see displays showing the progress of human forces across Zephyrian space. "Mr. President, we have achieved all primary military objectives. Zephyrian shipbuilding capacity has been eliminated. Their command structure has collapsed. The remaining forces are in full retreat or have surrendered." President Foster nodded slowly. Casualties on their side. Military casualties are estimated at over 2 million. Civilian casualties are minimal, as we have avoided targeting population centers. However, their economic infrastructure has been severely damaged. The president was quiet for a moment. Helen knew he was thinking about the moral implications of their actions. Humanity had demonstrated military capabilities that terrified the rest of the galaxy, but they had also shown restraint in how those capabilities were used. "Admiral, what is your assessment of their ability to threaten human civilians again?" Helen looked at her tactical displays, showing the scattered remnants of Zephyrian forces hiding in distant systems. "Mr. President, the Zephyrian Empire no longer exists as a military threat. They lack the shipyards to build new vessels, the command structure to coordinate operations, and the will to continue fighting. It would take them decades to rebuild even a fraction of their former capability. And the other species in the galaxy? How are they responding to our actions?" "Commander," White stepped forward to answer. "Mr. President, we are receiving diplomatic communications from over 40 different species. Most are requesting clarification of human intentions. Several are offering to mediate a peace settlement. None are threatening military action against us." Helen understood the implications. The galaxy had watched humanity destroy one of its most powerful military forces in less than a month. Other species were now calculating whether their own civilizations could survive human attention. They chose the wrong side. President Foster made his decision. "Admiral Brooks, you were authorized to begin peace negotiations with surviving Zephyrian authorities. However, the terms will be dictated by humanity. They chose to murder our children. They will live with the consequences of that choice for generations." The communication ended, and Helen turned to her staff to begin planning the final phase. Of the war, military objectives had been achieved, but the political objectives were just beginning. Captain Susan Torres appeared on the communication array. From her position orbiting the former Zephyrian capital world, her ship and others were maintaining a blockade that prevented any military vessels from approaching the planet. "Admiral, we have located the surviving Zephyrian leadership. They are requesting permission to surrender formally." Helen felt a cold satisfaction. The beings who had ordered the genocide of New Portland were finally ready to face justice. "Bring them to the Liberty under heavy guard. I want complete records of their decision-making process regarding the attack on our civilians." The formal surrender ceremony took place in the main hangar bay of the Liberty. Helen stood on a raised platform, flanked by human military officers. As the surviving Zephyrian leaders were brought before her, the aliens looked broken, their blue skin pale, and their movements showing the fear that had consumed them. The lead Zephyrian, former military commander Zaraketh, stepped forward. She was the same alien who had insulted humanity during diplomatic negotiations months earlier. Now she stood as a prisoner facing judgment for war crimes. "Admiral Brooks," she said, her voice barely audible. "The Zephyrian military command formally surrenders all forces to human authority. We request mercy under the Galactic Conventions." Helen looked down at the alien who had once called humans weak predators, pretending to be prey. "Commander Zaraketh, your forces murdered over 300,000 human civilians, including children in schools and patients in hospitals. You targeted refugee shelters and executed civilians who attempted to surrender. These are crimes against sentient life." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You will be transported to New Portland, where you will stand trial before the families of your victims. You will face justice for every child you killed, every family you destroyed." Zaraketh's legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees. The reality of her situation had finally penetrated her mind. She would not be negotiating a comfortable exile or paying reparations. She would face the consequences of her actions in front of the people she had tried to exterminate. Helen turned to address the assembled crowd of human officers and Zephyrian prisoners. "Let this be understood throughout the galaxy. Humanity chose peace for fifth." Ambassador Lisa Carter walked into the rebuilt Galactic Council chambers 6 months after the end of the Zephyrian War. The room looked the same as before, with its circular design and seats arranged for equal representation. But everything else had changed. The seat at the head of the table, once occupied by rotating council members, now permanently belonged to humanity. Behind Lisa, Colonel Jake Morrison took his position as her military advisor. His presence was no longer symbolic. Every species in the galaxy now understood that human diplomatic delegations were backed by the most powerful military force in known space. The other ambassadors filed in quietly, their expressions careful and respectful. Lisa remembered when these same beings had dismissed human concerns and ignored human requests for justice. Now they watched her every move, analyzing her words for hints about humanity's intentions. The Altarian ambassador, a tall, insect-like creature named Clickthick, approached Lisa's table. His species had been neutral during the Zephyrian conflict, but they had also been trading partners with the now-destroyed Empire. "Ambassador Carter, my government wishes to express our continued commitment to peaceful relations with humanity." Lisa smiled politely. "Thank you, Ambassador Clickthick. Humanity values peace above all other considerations. We hope that recent events have clarified what happens when that peace is threatened." The insect ambassador nodded quickly and returned to his seat. Lisa noticed that several other ambassadors had overheard the conversation and word was already spreading through the chamber. Her message was clear. Humanity preferred peace. But everyone now knew the alternative. President Daniel Foster appeared on the main display screen, addressing the Council from Earth. His image filled the chamber. As he began his speech to the reformed Galactic Council, fellow members of the Council, 6 months ago, the Zephyrian Empire chose to commit genocide against human civilians. They murdered over 300,000 innocent people, including children. The chamber remained completely silent. Several ambassadors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The trial of Zephyrian war criminals had been broadcast across the galaxy, showing the evidence of systematic murder of civilians. No one could claim ignorance about what had happened. Humanity's response was swift and decisive. President Foster continued, "We eliminated the Zephyrian military threat in 73 days. We captured their leadership and brought them to justice. We demonstrated capabilities that had been hidden for 15 years. Lisa watched the faces around the chamber. These beings had spent years testing human patience, believing that humanity's peaceful nature made them weak. The destruction of the Zephyrian Empire had shattered that illusion permanently. Today, we established new protocols for galactic governance, the president announced. These protocols will ensure that no species ever again faces the systematic extermination that befell our people on New Portland. The new protocols were comprehensive and heavily favored human interests. Trade agreements would be renegotiated with humanity receiving preferred status. Territory disputes involving human space would be resolved through arbitration panels with human representatives. Most importantly, any attack on civilian populations would be considered an act of war against all council members. Ambassador Quilnar of the Centauri Federation raised a tentative appendage. His species had been among those that had harassed human shipping before the war. President Foster, these protocols represent a significant change in council operations. How can we be assured that humanity will not abuse its new position? President Foster's expression remained neutral, but Lisa could see the steel behind his eyes. Ambassador Quilnar, humanity has demonstrated restraint even in victory. Could have eliminated the Zephyrian population entirely, but we chose to target only military assets. Could have demanded tribute from their surviving colonies, but we chose to allow them to rebuild under supervision. The president paused, letting his words sink in. However, we will never again allow our peaceful intentions to be mistaken for weakness. Any species that threatens human civilians will face the full might of our military forces. This is not a threat, it is a promise. Dr. Sharon Lewis, now head of the Human Diplomatic Corps, stood to present the restructuring of galactic trade agreements. Her chart showed how human colonies would receive priority access to shipping lanes and favorable rates for essential goods. Species that had maintained good relations with humanity would benefit from these new arrangements. The Betelgeuse Consortium, for example, provided medical aid to New Portland survivors, Dr. Lewis explained. Will receive most favored nation status in all trade agreements. The Vegan Republic, which offered to mediate peace negotiations, will have access to human technology exchanges. Lisa noticed that several ambassadors were taking careful notes. The message was clear. Friendship with humanity brought rewards, while hostility brought consequences that could destroy entire civilizations. The Andromedan representative, a crystalline being that communicated through light patterns, flashed a series of questions about the former Zephyrian territories. The translation system converted the lights into words. What will become of the Zephyrian colonies that surrendered without resistance? Lisa stood to answer. The former Zephyrian territories have been placed under protective supervision. Populations will be relocated to worlds suitable for their biology. Yes. They will be prohibited from maintaining military forces beyond those necessary for local security. Most importantly, they will be required to provide reparations to the families of their victims. The chamber buzzed with quiet conversations as the implications became clear. The Zephyrian Empire had been completely dismantled, its people scattered to prevent any future military threat. It was a fate that every species in the galaxy would remember. When considering their relations with humanity, Admiral Helen Brooks appeared on a secondary screen to address military considerations. Her presence reminded everyone that the diplomatic negotiations were backed by overwhelming force. The human colonial fleet will maintain permanent patrol stations throughout the former Zephyrian territories. We will also establish rapid response bases and key systems to ensure the protection of civilian populations. The military reorganization was equally comprehensive. Human ships would have access to every star system in council space. Human bases would be established at strategic locations throughout the galaxy. Most significantly, human military forces would have the authority to intervene in any conflict that threatened civilian populations. Colonel Morrison leaned forward to whisper in Lisa's ear, "Ambassador, we are receiving requests for private meetings from over 20 different species. They want to clarify their status under the new arrangements." Lisa nodded. The requests were expected. Every species in the galaxy was now recalculating their diplomatic positions based on humanity's demonstrated capabilities. Those that had been hostile or dismissive were desperately seeking ways to improve relations. Those that had been neutral were offering alliance and cooperation. The formal session concluded with the unanimous adoption of the new protocols. Lisa noted that the vote was unanimous only because no one dared to oppose humanity's proposals. Fear was a powerful motivator in galactic politics. After the session, Lisa met privately with several ambassadors who had requested clarification of their status. The Regellian trade minister wanted assurance that his shipping contracts would be honored. The Tau Ceti cultural exchange director sought confirmation that human students would continue participating in interspecies. Programs at each conversation followed the same pattern. The aliens would express their commitment to peaceful relations, emphasize their species' contributions to galactic civilization, and carefully avoid any mention of past disagreements with humanity. Lisa responded with polite assurances while making it clear that humanity's patience had limits. The most significant meeting was with the Proxima Centauri Defense Council. Their representatives had come to negotiate a formal alliance, offering their military support in exchange for human protection. It was the first of many such requests that would reshape galactic politics. Ambassador Carter, the Proximon general, said, "Our species has always valued the peaceful resolution of conflicts. We believe our civilizations share common values that could benefit from closer cooperation." Lisa remembered when the Proximans had refused to support human calls for sanctions against Zephyrian aggression. Now they wanted an alliance. "General Kextal, humanity appreciates your offer of cooperation. We believe that species which demonstrate consistent support for peace and justice make the best partners." The negotiations continued for hours, but the outcome was predetermined. The Proximans would receive human protection in exchange for basing rights and intelligence sharing. They would join a growing network of species that had chosen to align themselves with humanity rather than risk becoming its enemies. As the day ended, Lisa stood in her private office, overlooking the station's central hub. Through the transparent walls, she could see ships from dozens of different species. Human vessels moved among them with confidence, no longer hiding their military capabilities behind civilian disguises. Colonel Morrison joined her at the window. "Ambassador, how do you think the galaxy will adapt to the end?"